stupid questions. So, asked the policeman, why'd you wreck the car? Replied the driver, because I thought it would be so much fun to meet a nice police officer like you. Well, sarcasm is no excuse for wit. A 12th grade English teacher reminded us of this with a posted notice behind her desk. However, sometimes it can play a very close second. And while, why aren't you married? Isn't necessarily a stupid question. It sometimes can bamboozle the one asked, leaving that person fumbling for an answer, perhaps even a snappy one. In the now 15 years plus college, which has actually become the now 19 years plus college, I've gotten the why aren't you married question or its cousin from a greater variety of folks than one might ever have imagined. Hannah, a third grader at the time, asked with the earnestness of her age, why don't you have a husband and kids? Aren't you lonely without a family? Yep, Hannah, a homeless woman with whom I was eating lunch, asked between bites of her pizza, so weren't you married? Don't want to be, eh? A big-hearted, completely sincere member of the board for which I was the note-taker declared in wonder during our break time, I'm amazed. Why hasn't anyone snatched you up yet? It's a bit awkward to know how to respond. Most memorable, however, were the words spoken to me at another wedding reception. The mother of the groom, whose bride was actually 4 years my senior, took my then 29-year-old hands in hers, looked directly in my eyes, and implored, why isn't a beautiful young woman like you married? At that moment, her words felt something like a plea for me to stop doing or being something wrong, or maybe a prayer to God Almighty on my behalf. In truth, I think it was a well-meant compliment flowing out of the motherly love. I remember looking her back in the eye with the least vacant look I could conjure up, and pleasantly mumbling something about not having met the right person yet. A few hours later, however, as her words still throbbed with their unintended sting, I came up with my own snappy answers. Well, see, actually, one of my personalities, Jane to be precise, Jane is married. But the other three, well, okay, Mary has way too many issues. Sue is a total commitment phobe, and Sally is way too independent. My 12th grade English teacher was right, however. Sarcasm is not a wit substitute, and in the end, even the most deliciously crafted, snappy response can't hold at bay a question that seems to nip the heels of many single women as they move into their late 20s or early 30s. Yeah, why, so many of my friends have wondered, am I not married? Or here you might plug in your own why question. It's a question that more women than ever before are bumping up against. In the last 40 years, the population of 20 to 30-something college-educated single women has exploded. In 1960, this group represented 1.6% of all women between the ages of 25 and 34, or the rough equivalent of the then population of Fort Wayne, Indiana. Today, this population has grown to a staggering 28%, roughly equivalent to 2.3 million women or 4 Boston areas. So, a lot of these poor Boston residents, scattered throughout the nation, are sitting around with their girlfriends, doing dinner on Friday nights and drinking cups of coffee on Saturday mornings, poking and prodding for answers to the same question about men and marriage. In one sense, answers are already out there. I mean, actually, many people who ask the question already have answers in mind. Mary, my homeless friend, immediately attributed my singleness to a lack of desire. And the board member answered his own question with a rhetorical, no guy been good enough yet, huh? I'm not sure if he meant that objectively, or if it was implying something about my subjective judgment. For I have been told by folks, numerous folks, that perhaps I'm too something. The blanket's been filled in with picky. Yeah, picky, but then eager also. Like, how do picky and eager go together? I don't know. Picky, eager, real, scared, and threatening. I suppose all those things probably have some grain of truth, honestly. My very down-to-earth hairstylist Jackie once commented, lowering and pointing her shears like a therapist with reading glasses. And she was from Philly. She She's like, look, you're really into the God thing. If you're going to find a man, he's got to be into the God thing too. Because no guy is going to want to compete with God, girl. Dr. Jack was very insightful. Maybe the God thing has gotten in the way. Ironically, by the time I graduated from college, I had my own back-of-the-mind explanation for unmarried women over 30. With nuns and wealthy heiresses as possible exceptions, the reason seemed quite clear. Those women, women who are over 30, those women were either unusually unattractive, had issues with their father, or were gay. Now, where my conclusions came from, I have no idea. But you can imagine why I felt derailed when, as I neared the end of my 29th year, that dear woman held my hands and asked me why I wasn't married. What was I really going to say? I'm not sure. I guess it must be because I'm ugly, have issues with my dad, or I'm gay. I don't think any of this back-of-the-mind thinking is atypical. Libby, a single 40-year-old friend, laughingly recounted a recent conversation with a 21-year-old male friend of hers. Note, Libby has normal father's issues, and is straight. When she was talking with this young college guy about the recent engagement of a mutual 20-something friend of theirs, the guy declared with a smile of knowing authority, "Ah, well, Libby, it was inevitable that Kristen would get engaged. She's so great." Of course, the message that he didn't even hear himself sending to Libby was clear. If A equals B, great women like Kristen inevitably get engaged, then unfortunately not B equals not A. In other words, unmarried women such as Libby must lack greatness. It seems that no matter where you turn, to a third grader, a homeless woman, an esteemed and gifted board member, a college guy, a nurturing mother type, or perhaps even yourself, the answer to the question, why aren't you married, often boils down to the same thing. It's probably your issue. You know, occasionally some wise older married man will shake his head, roll his eyes, and offer with an exasperated sigh, "What's wrong with guys today? You're such a catch, they're all idiots." Or as a loving girlfriend once said to Libby, "You know, I have a beef with God about his not bringing you a husband." In other words, the locus of responsibility does sometimes shift away from the woman and her perhaps unidentifiable flaw. As an aside, I have often wondered if straight, attractive single women with an unfulfilled desire for marriage scare people. I told one friend that a weekend spent as the only unmarried bridesmaid in a wedding felt something akin to being plopped down naked with my upper leg cellulite and stomach rolls on display. Sure, everyone has some fact that they wish would melt away, but mine was impossible to hide. And the sight seemed to cause a quizzical, slightly disturbed shock among otherwise really gracious people. Picture crinkled noses, furrowed brows, and awkward silences. Perhaps straight, attractive single women with an unfulfilled desire for marriage are an awkward reminder that all is not right with the world. And that's a bit of a conversation killer at a wedding. Of course, some women don't want to get married. One friend of mine said candidly, as I grew up, I could never see myself married. I had too many other things I wanted to do and to be about. Fair enough. And when asked, why aren't you married? Her reply is simple. I've never been that interested in marriage. There are decidedly many meaningful things into which a woman can and should pour herself beyond a husband and children. A woman's freedom to make this decision is one of the great and unprecedented privileges of living in the West today. But it seems like most single women I've known, somewhere between the ages of 28 and 32, if not before, start asking the why question and grope, some more doggedly than others, for answers. So we are brought full circle to the girlfriend's coffee clutch. A few years ago, I was in Vancouver, Canada, for a work-related conference. I took the occasion to spend one free evening with an older Scottish couple, Jim and Rita Houston, with whom I had lived while in graduate school. Though we hadn't kept up since then, I I always had a warm spot in my heart for them, built on fond memories of Sunday afternoon family lunches. 5 students lived with the Houstons at the time. Games of Scrabble in front of the fire, and incisive comments from each of them. Mrs. Houston was a practical, matter-of-fact woman. Dear, it's better to be single and wish you were married than to be married and wish you were single. Yeah, all the married people were like, She had a good point. And Dr. Houston, who looked like a clean-cut, twinkly-eyed Santa Claus, was a professor of spiritual theology at college. His words, as you grow, you'll discover that your personhood is more important than your personality. I always nodded with a 23-year-old's faith that one day I'd actually know what he was talking about. But 13 years later, I was once again in their home, eating Scottish food and playing Scrabble. During the evening, we chatted about my work, mutual friends, our families, and the direction that the college was going. To my surprise and perhaps relief, nobody mentioned my marital status, and the conversation remained pleasant and easy. Then, at a reasonable hour, the Houstons were both now in their mid to upper 70s, Dr. Houston suggested he drive me back to my hotel. Mrs. Houston and I bid each other goodbye. I can't remember what we were discussing at the moment, but as we moved through the numbered streets, Dr. Houston quietly spoke. You've suffered much being single. I couldn't tell if he was asking me or telling me. I stammered like a person who'd just gotten away with indigestion. In fact, the word suffered had hit something in my guts. I'm sorry, he said in silence. It was strange, his use of the word suffer. It seemed a bit dramatic. I mean, isn't suffering when you have a horrible disease, lose a family member in a car wreck, starve in a famine, go through war in the Middle East? Isn't that what it is to really suffer? I decided to shake it off. More silence. Then he continued. Your mother, too. She has suffered in your singleness. Now he was getting into my business. I watched the storefronts and their neon signs whiz by the blurs we drove through downtown Vancouver. I was ready to be in that hotel. I tightened my stomach, trying to muffle the chords his word had struck. Well, yeah, I replied. I mean, I think it really was hard on her at first because it messed up her vision of her daughter's ideal life. And then I think her sadness switched, to just being disappointed on my behalf. Like any mom would be sad to see her daughter's desires go unmet. And then I quickly added as if to say, but let's not get all grim about this. There is a silver lining in the cloud. But I think it has made me appreciate my parents more, grown closer to them than I otherwise would have. Yes, he quietly concurred. Of course, that's good. He was looking at the road through the windshield, and I now joined him, staring straight ahead. Come on, hotel. The question, of course, he continued, is how will you suffer? Will you suffer with bitterness, or will you suffer prophetically? Oh Lord, I don't like how this thing all sounds. You see, your generation is experiencing the fallout of a culture profoundly confused about who God is, and therefore about what it is to be human and what it is to love. Your relational disappointments and suffering are, sadly, emblematic of the age. It suddenly seemed like he was speaking from a vantage point I did not want to share. I did not want to be the poster child for some